Hey everyone, it's Chala from Yes I Love You. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm going to be making a card for the Scrap and Stamp Canada's blogspot. I'll leave the link in the description box below. Go ahead and check them out. So I went through all my products and I found a whole bunch of lawn fawn things that would work for a Chinese New Year card. Chinese New Year starts on February 5th and I thought it would be fun to use a magic slider card. So I'm going to go ahead and get some acetate as well as some red cardstock and some pattern paper. I'll begin with this rectangle die and I'll cut that piece out with my big kick here. I've got the magnetic platform on the bottom, which works really great, and I'll quickly run that through, and then I'm going to use the main portion of this magic slider card and I'll cut that out on red cardstock. I'm going to first inlay that stitched rectangle kind of centered inside that top part there. You can tell it's the top by that little tab on the bottom. I'm using some purple thermal web tape to hold that in place as I run that through. And I carefully remove that tape. And then I'm going to go ahead and the next component of this magic slider card is the actual slider portion here. And there's there's a little U-shaped kind of rail, and I'm actually going to cut two of those out. Now my mom went ahead for me and cut a whole bunch of these little slider portions and the little rails there out and stuck them in my envelope so that they were ready to go next time I wanted to make this card, which was awesome. So I'm going to go ahead and take the piece of acetate that we cut out, and you're also going to need a white piece of cardstock cut from that same square die. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly do that here off camera. So I have those two pieces. I'm using my stamp platform and I'm using the pig from the Hey There set because it's the year of the pig, the speech bubble from Happy Village, and the Ni Hao saying from the Reveal Wheel Sentiments. I'm going to go ahead and kind of line this little piggy up here and just kind of lay out where I want my stamps to be. I've affectionately referred this little piggy as Hamlet in my mind. He kind of looks like a Hamlet to me. So I'm going to lay that white piece behind the acetate, making sure that they are lined up nicely. I'm using StazOn ink. Now this is important when you're stamping on acetate to use the StazOn. And when you're done stamping, you want to make sure that you set that aside, don't touch it, let it dry. Because I'm going to be coloring Hamlet up here, I'm going to be using some Memento Jet Black ink. And I will stamp that down. Again, the platform is important because you want to make sure that you're stamping that pig in the exact same spot on that white cardstock as you did on the acetate. You need those lined up to make that magic portion go. So just kind of laying out where I want my speech bubble to be here. Bringing in that red cardstock piece to make sure that nothing's being covered. I'll stamp that again in the Memento Black Tuxedo ink. I think before I said Jet Black ink. Sorry, it's the Tuxedo ink for Memento. And I've got my little Ni Hao sentiment that I'm going to place inside that speech bubble. And I really just want to make sure that it lines up perfectly because the speech bubble is just big enough for that little sentiment. So I went ahead and colored this little guy up off camera. I like to color on the go with my kids. I listed the Copic markers there. And then I also used a gel pen to add some little highlights on his cheeks. I think that turned out really nicely. Just some quick coloring, nothing too fancy. So from here, what you want to do is you want to take your acetate piece and we're going to adhere it on the inside top portion where that window is. And I'm using some Be Creative tape here. And I will put that on the top part, how do I want to say that? All around the edges on the top part. Because you'll actually be adhering this underneath the window. And you'll see that here in just a minute. I'm going to put the slider component in just to make sure that when I adhere that colored piece that I know where I'm going to place it. You'll see here in a minute what I'm talking about. I want it to make sure that it's fitting nicely, because if I put it down too low, that slider could catch on the top of that rectangle and it won't slide nicely. So I want to make sure that it's adhered kind of just underneath where that slider would be so it doesn't catch. Just using some adhesive here on the back, just a tape runner, and I will place that down. And when I fold it over, you can see that that slider portion is not going to catch on the top. I'll line the acetate piece up so that everything lines up perfectly. I'll have to remove the slider here, otherwise the top portion will stick down. So again, lining that up, making sure that it is absolutely perfect. And I'll use my craft pick here to remove the liner from this Be Creative tape, kind of holding the acetate in place to make sure that I have it in the correct position. Alright, so what I want to do is make sure it's perfectly lined up. If you get it off center, it'll look funny and it won't work. And then I'm going to hold that in place as I fold down the top of that slider. And then there, it's kind of stuck down to our window. When you lift it up, you can see that it lines up perfectly. So I'll go ahead and put that slider portion back in and pull it through, and then ta-da! The magic. I think that is so much fun. So then from here we want to place those little guide rails. And like I said, I die cut, or had two of those die cut out, and I zoom out so you can see it here. And I want to adhere these together. And I'm going to do this with that Be Creative score tape again, and just kind of laying it down. I'll lay it down on both sides of this piece. And then I'll show you a neat little trick here. I'm going to take my craft pick and I'm just going to lift the edge of this and fold it kind of to the right, just kind of hanging off the edge. And this one I'm going to fold down to the left, not removing it all the way. The bottom piece, I'll do that again on the edge, just kind of folding it and bending it over. And what this does is it allows me to adhere just these parts of it so that I can line it up absolutely perfectly. If I remove that liner, I'd have stickiness all over, it would stick to my hands, I wouldn't be able to line it up neatly and nicely. So I find this works really great. I'll get those lined up, those sticky pieces stuck down. Then from here I just hold it and I gently pull that adhesive down and it lines up perfectly. Again, I'll pull that down and again, it's perfect. It works really well. So a cool little trick that I use all the time for kind of delicate pieces like this. So you can see that it's lined up perfectly. I now will need to adhere it down to the bottom here, and using that little slider part as a guide as to where it's going to go and making sure it slides nicely. So I'll go ahead and remove that back portion of the score tape. Again, doing the exact same thing, not pulling it all off, just taking a portion, pulling it down, and folding it to the side. Again, this will allow me to line it up without having to get everything stuck down. Just in case it does stick, I'm not ripping everything. I don't get it lined up quite right here, so it worked well. I could easily take it up, reposition it, making sure it's all nice and lined up on the edges. And then on the corners here, I want to make sure it's all nice and even. And then you just grab those little edges and you gently pull away and it just adheres perfectly. Look at that, it's just so easy. It works so well. And then you can see my slider works nicely in there. Now I also need to apply the adhesive on the top of the rail. I'll go ahead and do that. And just as I did before, I will pull back just some corners of that adhesive and then lay the top portion down and then pull them out. So taking my craft pick, pulling it down and to the sides. Again, on the bottom, the exact same thing. And then when I fold this over, it sticks just in those few places. And then here, I think I pulled a little too hard. You'll see I pull down too hard and I actually rip it, but I can lift it up from the bottom and try again. It just saves from everything going all wonky if you're trying to adhere something down and you have adhesive stuck to your hand and to just everywhere. So there, it's all perfectly matched up. Our slider works. It's like magic. I love it. Now I'm going to actually use these little tabs. I cut 2 of them out of red cardstock. There's a couple different styles that you can choose from, but I like these ones. I'm going to use my Gina clip neck glue and my reverse tweezers here and just kind of adhere that down, making sure that they line up. And then I'm going to put an acrylic block on top of those and just to weight it down a bit and set it to the side and let it dry. Now we'll move on to the card base. Now I just actually printed out some digital paper here from my Silhouette Studio. I didn't have any in my stash that worked, so I just printed some out. And it's the standard A2 card, so 5.5 by 4.25 side folding card. And I adhere that down to the front of the card. And then I actually wanted to do something on the inside. So I looked through my stash again and found the Year 8 stamp here. It's got some fortune cookies and a little banner. Now the banner has a birthday sentiment. I didn't want to use birthday because this is a New Year card. So what I'll end up doing is inking that up and then removing some of the ink. And I'll show you how that'll work here. So again, I want to color this with my Copic markers. So I will use Memento jet black ink, stamping that down. And I kind of fiddle with this banner to figure out how I'm going to do this. So I stamp it up and then I use my finger to remove the ink from the words. And then I stamp it out on a scrap piece of paper to see how that looks. Now, it didn't do too bad, but I wanted to try and get a better impression. So I fiddle around here for a while. I ink it up again, and then what do? I think I try to just get the edges. That doesn't work. But I use a baby wipe. And so I'm really taking my time here. Sorry, my head gets in the way, but I want to make sure that I get all the ink off those letters. And then once I think I have all of that removed, I stamp it down. Now, the border isn't perfect. That's okay. I'm actually going to go ahead and use my Copic liner and retrace that. And then I'll go ahead and color the fortune cookie and write in my Happy New Year sentiment. And I'll put the colors of the Copic markers that I used at the top left there. And then I just think that's a nice little addition on the inside of that card. So then the final thing that we have to do here is I wanted to add some kind of like a little interest to the card with this twine. It's actually, what is it? It's cross-stitch floss, I believe is what it is. Just a yellow cross-stitch floss that I thought went nicely. And I'm going to thread that through that little hole. And I decided, I had started here and I wanted it actually to be doubled up even more. So I'm going to pull it out, fold that piece over again and rethread it. I wanted it to kind of have that tassel look. There is a good fortune kind of charm. We actually have them hanging over our door at my house here. And you'll see it in the picture. And they have these little tassels. So I kind of wanted to recreate that look. Just using my Cutter Bee scissors here to snip that off. and then that gives us something to kind of pull with. Because when you attach that down to the card, that pull tab might be a little difficult to grab. So from here, I'm just going to use a thicker score tape. This is the, I believe it's the 5mm, I believe this is. Again, just going around the edge of this. This Be Creative tape is really nice and strong, and especially if you have a component that is going to be pulled on, you want to make sure that it's stuck down really well. So again, using my craft pick here just to kind of lift the edges, so that's easier to pull that off. Now I'm not going to use my little trick on this, on adhering this. You could, but this time I just pulled it all off, and I'll line it up for the middle of the card. So kind of get that centered on how I want it. And then just push it down into place. And then that pretty much finishes off our card, except I added just a few little gold sequins that I think I picked up from the dollar store to the top of the card to finish that off. And then here you can see the finished product. I think it's really cool how this kind of simple card has a little surprise in it. And then there you see kind of the little tassel look I was going for. Some simple coloring, a simple card to make to celebrate the Chinese New Year. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. As always, if you like this video, go ahead and hit that like button. If you'd like to see more, hit the subscribe. And also please check out some of these other videos that I've made in the past. Thanks again so much for joining me, guys. Have a wonderful day.